It's no secret that Pink Floyd's album Wish You Were Here is inspired by their former member Syd Barrett. Like plenty of other music, it explores themes such as personal relationships and the longing for success. But this album is unlike anything else because it's the perfect marriage of three things. 1. The band finally developing a musical sound that took years to evolve. 2. Their discontent and confusion after the success of Dark Side of the Moon. And 3. Their own personal heartbreak after what happened to Syd. It was a very difficult album to make, but this record would go on to be a turning point for Pink Floyd, both professionally and for their relationship with Syd. Pink Floyd was formed in 1965 in London, initially consisting of members Roger Waters, Nick Mason, Richard Wright and Syd Barrett. Syd was the creative driving force of the band. He held a stage presence and had a charisma that propelled them into stardom. Their early hits such as Arnold Lane and See Emily Play were written by Syd, and he gave them this unique sound and musical direction. David Gilmour hadn't yet joined the band, and Roger hadn't yet developed his skill in writing lyrics, so it was really Syd that was leading the way. Sadly, however, Syd's mental state deteriorated in these early years, and it became quite difficult to work with him. What made him this creative genius also had a troubled side. His heavy drug use left him very erratic, and this soon developed into a worsening mental illness. They brought in David Gilmour, who would be a backup for Syd, for when Syd couldn't even play the guitar. And the idea was that he could be this kind of Brian Wilson figure where he'd stay at home, work on the music, whilst the others went out on tour. But sadly, Syd's mental state continued to decline, and in 1968 he officially left the band. Syd would go on to release 2 solo albums, The Madcap Laughs and Barrett, both released in 1970, and there were some attempts to get him involved in other musical projects as well. But ultimately, it wasn't working. As loved as he was, it was just proving too difficult to work with him, and his mental state continued to decline. For Pink Floyd, where did they go from here? They just lost their songwriter and lead singer and guitarist.
Those of us who were in Pink Floyd at the time experienced it as an existential threat as well. What are we going to do? He writes the bloody songs.
Well, anyone who knows Pink Floyd knows they've always been at the forefront of musical innovation. Their early work experimented with light shows and different soundscapes, and later on they become known for their expansive pieces such as Atom Heart Mother and Echoes. But these experimental works were really just an attempt for them to find their sound after losing Syd. With him gone, they were really just unsure of what to do. It took years of experimentation, and they did release some good music during this time. Some of my favourite Pink Floyd music is from this period. But in 1973, it finally clicked, and everything came together perfectly for Dark Side of the Moon.
Taking away the moments that make up the dull day.
Roger's lyrics were beautifully poignant, the music explored themes that everyone related to, and it was also the most innovative time in the studio. The success of Dark Side of the Moon was immediate, both critically and financially. But rather than being a catalyst for further success, it kind of left them feeling lost, just like before, and being unsure of what to do next. They'd achieved everything they'd initially set out to, but yet again it left them in this state of uncertainty. This was the birth of Wish You Were Here. The album only contains 5 different tracks. 2 of them are the different parts of Shine On You Crazy Diamond, so there are only 4 different musical ideas. Welcome to the Machine is a song about musical discovery, only to be betrayed by an industry more interested in success and greed. Similar too are the themes explored in Have a Cigar, and these 2 are followed by Wish You Were Here, which is one of their most famous songs. How much this song is about Syd is unclear, but the 2 songs that bookend the album, Shine On You Crazy Diamond, are most definitely a tribute to Syd. So what started out as a difficult time was soon encapsulated in this illustration of their journey up until now, and of course the role Syd played in that. In hindsight, this seems so obvious given what they'd all been through as a band, but Wish You Were Here was not an easy album to make.
I sort of knew that really we were over as far as the Band of Brothers notion of a pop group was concerned. We just weren't anymore, and we were never going to be that again. And so I was mourning that loss as well as the loss of of Syd as a friend and as a colleague.
The recording process was torturous, and they'd spend days just sitting around, getting drunk, desperately trying to come up with ideas. On one occasion, the engineer ruined the backing vocals that Roger and Nick had spent hours trying to perfect. And trouble within their personal life just brought a feeling of apathy and lack of enthusiasm. But the most notable event from recording took place on the 5th of June 1975. They were finishing the mix on Shine On You Crazy Diamond when in walked this overweight man with no hair, no eyebrows, carrying a plastic bag. No one recognised him, and he was presumed to be an EMI staff member. But eventually they started to realise who it was. It was Syd.
There was this guy standing there in a gabardine raincoat, a large bloke, and I had no idea who it was.
Who's that person? What's he doing wandering around all our gear and couldn't be in the studio?
He'd suddenly appeared after not speaking to any of them for years. Nick Mason was horrified, and Roger Waters was apparently moved to tears. And it's said that this moment led Richard Wright to include a refrain of See How Many Play at the very end of Shine On You Crazy Diamond. They played the music for Syd to see what he thought of it, and he described it as a bit old. It just so happened that the same day David Gilmour happened to be celebrating his wedding, but Syd quietly slipped away, and other than Roger briefly seeing him shopping a few years later, no one from Pink Floyd ever saw him again.
Shine on, you crazy diamond.
For many people, Wish You Were Here is Pink Floyd's greatest work. Apparently it is for Richard Wright and David Gilmour.
To me, it's about the most complete album in some ways. The balance between the musical strength and the emotions that are tied up within pure music and the greatness of the lyrics come together in a balance which is as close to my idea of perfection in that area as I can think of.
But this album is only in existence because of Syd Barrett. When he left the band, they were struggling to find their musical voice and direction. But Syd's influence and genius lives on through this music, even though he had no direct part in making it and didn't even like it that much. But his vision of innovation and creativity stuck with the band, and it led them to create this album. Syd may have left the band years earlier, and this album may symbolise an end to that relationship, but his influence lives on through their later music as well. You could even argue that equal to his earlier musical work, Syd's greatest musical contribution was his influence and creativity that stuck with the band even through their later years.